Well, over 400 people we're expecting to join us on this webinar, which is a wonderful engagement. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Steve Edmonds. I'm NGA's Director of Advice and Guidance, and I'm joined today on this webinar on the topic of the Send Green Paper by my colleague and Head of Advice, Rani Kaur. Rani and I work very closely on Send issues and Send governance issues for NGA, and like most things we do, or all the things that we do, it's very much a collaborative team effort. So I'm really pleased to have Rani with me and joining me today at this webinar. So just a little bit about a little bit of housekeeping before we get underway. I'm sure if you've joined us before, you know that our webinars are probably the least interactive of all our forums. They really are lectures more than anything else. They span around 30 to 40 minutes. This webinar has been advertised at 40 minutes, just so you have the opportunity to settle. And we ask you to interact with us with questions and comments through the chat function, and we will go through all of those comments, and we will answer as many as we can by email after the webinar. So we won't be interacting with you during the course of the webinar. You'll be on mute just so we don't have any background noise, and of course we'll send the slides and any links to the resources we mention after the webinar, which is being recorded. So if you'd like to watch it again, or indeed share with your colleagues, your governor or trustee colleagues, then you're able to do that. So just a little on what we're going to be exploring with you today. So as advertised, we have two aims. First of all is we're going to give you an overview of what proposals set out in the government's green paper on Send and alternative provision actually entail for schools and the wider system. I'm sure that you know that the green paper is a vehicle by which the government seeks views from outside of Parliament on policy proposals. And the proposals set out in the green paper are currently out to public consultation. If I recall correctly, that consultation closes on the 22nd of July. And we're encouraging all of our governing boards to engage in that consultation, either directly or by letting us at NGA know what should go into our response. So we'll be giving you an overview of the green paper to hopefully clarify your thoughts on that. And if I may, I'll just also give a shout out for an information sheet that we published when the green paper was published at the end of March, which summarises the key proposals and gives you that shorthand explanation, which would inform your discussions at board level. The other part of the webinar we think is really important, and it's about our role, the role that those of us governing have in making any Send system the best it can be for our most vulnerable pupils. So we'll just remind ourselves of some of those key messages about what it actually truly means to use our best endeavours to support our most vulnerable pupils. So that's what we're going to cover with you today. Before we start our overview of the Send green paper and talk about the proposals, I think it's worth reminding ourselves of why these proposals are so badly needed. And that's simply because the previous reforms to the Send system made in 2014 have failed to achieve the goal of improving provision for children and young people with Send. And now, regrettably, we have a deepening crisis in Send. We have rising numbers of pupils with complex needs, a national crisis in terms of lack of capacity and funding to meet those needs, which has created an overspend of around £1 billion or more across England. Local authorities in huge financial deficit trying to meet those needs, and generally a lack of a sustainable joined-up solution to make the system meet the level of demand and meet it in a timely and an appropriate way. And why this matters is because whilst this system is broken, thousands of children and young people are continuing to pass through the system and not have their needs met, and families are spending years and years battling with authorities and with schools to get what they are entitled to and they deserve for their children. So there's really is a lot at stake here, and NGA welcomes the publication of the Green Paper. We were very disappointed that it, like others were, that it's taken so long. The process of Ascend review, or the best part of 3 years, to reach this point, during which time the crisis has only deepened. And so now we have a great opportunity, really, to improve, first and foremost, mainstream provision for pupils with SEND and levels of inclusion, to restore the faith of parents in the ability of mainstream education to meet the needs, and to stop many pupils and children and young people being sent prematurely into the SEND system, at the same time as ensuring that complex needs can be met in specialist provision. So a great deal at stake here, and at this point I'm going to hand over to Rani, who's going to explain how the proposals attempt to address these challenges.
Great, thank you, Steve. So yeah, hello everyone. It's good to have so many of you here today. So if you just move on to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to start off by talking about the key areas of improvement identified by the review and some of the proposed measures. So for many of you, the key findings will not come as a surprise. To start with, the review found that children and young people with SEND and those in AP have consistently poorer outcomes than their peers. These poorer outcomes relate to attainment, attendance, and rates of exclusion. And I think it's safe to say that everyone who governs will agree that it's not right, especially given that research from the Children's Commissioner's Big Ask survey carried out last September showed that children and young people with SEND have many of the same aspirations as their peers. And they said that education was important to their future plans. And so it's imperative, I think, that pupils with SEND are given the right opportunities to enable them to reach their full potential. The review also found that parents and carers are facing difficulty and delay in accessing support for their child. Too many parents and carers do not have the confidence that local mainstream schools can meet their child's needs, and this can lead to parents and carers being frustrated with the difficulties and delays they face in securing support for their child. By having to engage with multiple services and a lack of consistency amongst LAs, it can mean that support is not provided early enough. Although the system should be equally accessible, it was found that families without the financial and social means to navigate the system were at a disadvantage. The growing number of tribunal cases is also a concern. In the academic year of 2020 to 2021, there was an 8% increase in registered appeals in relation to SEND, with 96% of decided cases found at least part in favour of families. Despite this high success rate, families should not have to make the difficult decision of going to a tribunal. They come at an emotional and sometimes financial cost. In relation to the collaborative approach and the role of families, the SEND system should be collaborative, but the review found that too many families find the SEND system bureaucratic and adversarial. Currently, the system relies on families engaging with multiple services and assessments, making it difficult to navigate, especially for the families of children and young people with the most complex needs. In terms of funding, local government spending is outstripping funding, and so the system is financially unsustainable, with 2/3 of local authorities having growing deficits. In fact, by the end of 2020 to 2021, the total national deficit was over £1 billion. The review found that the system does not always deliver value for money, and outcomes and experiences for children and young people with SEND are not improving. The review also shone a light on inconsistencies across the SEND system, both in how needs are assessed and met. The 2014 reforms placed an emphasis on education, health and care, all working together with parents and carers. This approach also allowed for local discretion. However, it is this local discretion that has resulted in significant inconsistencies in how SEND provision is delivered in practice across the country. Inconsistencies start with how needs are identified and assessed, which can vary depending on the school a child or young person attends. There are also inconsistencies in guidance that sets out the type of settings that will meet particular needs. And the review found that these inconsistencies affect whether children and young people with the same types of needs receive an EHCP and where they are educated. In practice, a child or young person may be effectively supported in a mainstream school in one area of the country, but would need to be placed in a specialist setting if they were living in another. Overall, the challenges identified by the review can broadly be split into three key areas. Firstly, that outcomes for children and young people with SEND or in AP are poor. Secondly, navigating the SEND system and alternative provision is not a positive experience for children, young people and their families. And finally, the current system does not always deliver value for money for children, young people and families. So to address these challenges, the Green Paper focuses on the key themes of consistency, accountability and financial investment. And so we'll look at these in greater detail. Next slide, please. It's only fair that decisions about support and provision are made based on a child or young person's needs, not where they live or the setting they attend. The proposal is therefore to establish a new national SEND and AP system, which will set nationally consistent standards for how needs are identified and met across education, health and care. Included in this will be standards on what support should be made available universally in mainstream settings, as well as guidance on where EHCPs are required and when specialist provision, including AP, is most appropriate for meeting needs. It's intended that standardising how needs are identified will help reduce bureaucracy and delay and mean that children and young people have access to the support they need in the setting that is right for them. By setting out what needs can and should be met effectively in mainstream provision and the support that should be made generally available in mainstream settings, schools will be clear on the support they should be delivering. As mentioned, the system in its current form can be bureaucratic and adversarial for parents. A standardised system should help provide clarity and instill confidence that their child's needs are being met effectively and help those parents and carers with children with complex needs determine when a specialist setting is appropriate. It's hoped that such a standardised approach will also reduce the likelihood of misidentification driven by location, educational setting, or other factors such as race or disadvantage. We're aware, by speaking to members, that funding of provision is something that is of a big concern. And so plans for greater clarity about which partners should fund specific forms of support and provision will be welcome. The current emphasis on local decision-making has created the possibility of too much local discretion. And so it can be difficult for parents and carers and those MATs that work across a few regions to navigate the different processes. The standards will therefore be statutory, with the code updated accordingly, and would make consistent the provision, processes and systems for children and young people with SEND, acting as a common point of reference. Effective engagement with children, young people, parents and carers is something NJ is very much in favour of. And so we hope that consistent standards for co-production will help ensure that all the necessary people are engaged in the decision-making process. Although there is a drive towards a standardised approach, the Green Paper acknowledges that there may be times when local discretion is required. And so there is therefore a proposal to legislate for SEND partnerships. These will bring together representatives across education, health and care partners, and also other partners such as youth justice. Convened by local authorities, they will work together to deliver statutory responsibilities. I'm sure that when governors and trustees speak to their SENCOs, the time and resources required for the EHCP process regularly comes up. However, the review found great variations between areas in regard to the EHCP template and the process of inputting into them. It is therefore proposed that standardised EHCP templates and processes are introduced. The hope is that this will place a greater focus on the support that is being put in place. It will also help clarify whether support should be classed as education, health, or care interventions, and therefore funded by the appropriate service. Also proposed is that the EHCP process is digitised with a new digital EHCP template and a secure central location for parents, carers, and professionals to upload key information. The local inclusion plan will set out the provision that is available within the local area, including units within mainstream, alternative, and specialist provision. From this, parents and carers will be provided with a tailored list of settings that are appropriate to meet their child's needs, enabling them to make an informed choice. As you will already know, LAs can currently direct admissions in maintained schools. However, despite academies also being required to admit a child or young person with an EHCP, the power to direct admissions for academies remains with the Secretary of State. The plan is to consider changing this process so that were collaborative working to break down, LAs have a backstop power to direct trusts to admit children in these cases. In these cases, the trust could appeal to the school's adjudicator. Although the current system requires families to secure a mediation certificate before registering an appeal with the tribunal, they do not have to go through mediation itself. The proposed change would therefore require families and local authorities to engage in mediation prior to registering an appeal to the tribunal. The national standards will set clear expectations on how different parties should engage in mediation, including timescales for mediation to take place, and ensuring that local authority decision makers attend meetings. That's all from me for now.
Thank you very much, Rani. Let's move on then, shall we, to look at what the Green Paper says about how provision across the system will be improved. And we all recognise that this is a system that has been chronically under-resourced for a long time. So the funding that's associated with these proposals really does matter, and the proposals do come with funding, but not all of it is new. In fact, around 70 million, approximately 70 million pounds of it is new funding for these proposals, which on the face of it, you'd have to question if that's enough to achieve the level of system reform needed for our children and young people and for future generations. At the same time, I think we'd all recognise that there is a sustainability point here as well, because this is also a system whereby costs have consistently outrun the amount of resource available. So the cultural change that the Green Paper is trying to drive does go hand in glove with the funding and of the provision that's required. So you can see some of the numbers on that slide. You'll probably be most familiar with the £7 billion of funding announced in the 2019 election, and then in the subsequent spending reviews over a period of time up to 24-25, and that includes £1 billion for complex needs. And then we have smaller figures there attached to respite placements, support for family hubs providing wraparound support, and supporting internship programs as well. So all these things are absolutely vital component parts of the system, which ensure that at school level, where we have the most influence, we can actually deliver the type of support that we want for our children and young people. I'm just going to highlight amongst those numbers the additional 2.6 billion over 3 years for SEND capital. Now that is welcome because it provides flexibility to spend money on specialist units in mainstream settings, as well as new special schools. So we hear a lot from you and from local authorities that the speed at which new special school places can be brought online is too slow. So that is a vital part, a component part in these proposals. So the funding is very important. Whether there is sufficient funding there, time will tell, and I think that's a very important point that we'll be responding to in the consultation. I'd also like to talk about the new SENCO National Professional Qualification, because the Department for Education want to bring in a new leadership SENCO National Professional Qualification to replace what you'll be familiar with, I'm sure many of you, the current NACEN SENCO. And the SEN review said that the 3-year window to qualify as a SENCO does create what it described as an inherent risk of variation when people complete the course. So they're looking for more uniformity and consistency of standards. So the proposal is to strengthen the statutory timeframe for completion of this qualification, so that school leaders can be satisfied that a SENCO is in the process of obtaining a qualification when taking on the role, and it's not an open-ended period of time for them to complete that. And I mention this because obviously special educational needs coordinators are absolutely crucial, aren't they, in our strategy and our best endeavours for meeting pupils with SEND. And it's really important, which we always acknowledge, that the governing board and the SENCO have a great joined up relationship that ensures that our ambitions and our aspirations for these pupils are being met through strong provision, and that's actually been implemented in the way that the board sees, what wants it to be implemented. So that's really important, and actually it links to that final point on that slide there about improving mainstream provision. I've already mentioned this briefly, but that focus on improving mainstream inclusion is very important. It should see more children and young people with SEND in their local mainstream wherever possible, but that it means it's also crucial that parents have the confidence in the quality of that provision, and that it will improve both the outcomes and for those pupils, and a reduction in the use of special provision, which by its nature we all understand is more expensive. A little mention here at this point as well, obviously for the schools white paper, which was published alongside the SEND Green paper or just before. We know about the government's ambition for every school to be part of a strong multi-academy trust. But we also recognise that in this area, that in itself will not drive a sufficient increase in mainstream inclusion. So we're interested to see what detail is behind these proposals for trusts to actually be more inclusive with higher expectations in that area. We think that's a very important part of the future school system that the government envisage. So that's how the provision across the system will be improved, or what the Green Paper says about that. I'd like to move on now, if I may, to talk about alternative provision. And I know that many of you govern in alternative provision, so you'll absolutely, or are in schools that engage with alternative provision, so you'll absolutely understand the vital role that alternative provision plays in supporting our vulnerable pupils. I'm not going to go through all the points on this slide. Suffice to say that we as an organisation, as others were very pleased to see the integration of alternative provision and the SEND reforms through this Green Paper. So I'm just going to try to summarise briefly what this means for the future of alternative provision. For those of you who don't know what alternative provision is, I should just say that it's commissioned by local authorities for children who miss out on mainstream education because of exclusion or illness or some other reasons. And there is actually huge variability across the country of quality of provision, and that's associated with fluctuating funding and in some cases unregulated provision. So what the Green Paper is saying about alternative provision is that in future mainstream schools that access alternative provision should have a clear package of support that comes in 3 tiers. The first tier is targeted support. So for a child where there is behaviour concerns that disrupts others' learning, the school will have access to advice or coaching or even one-to-one support for that child at that first tier of support. The second tier of support that a school would have access to would be what is known as a time-limited placement for those who need something more for those pupils who need something more intensive to address their behaviour or anxiety, for example, or just re-engage with learning. And so the pupil will be dual registered and supported to return to the mainstream school when that support has done its job, hopefully. And then the third tier is the tier we're perhaps most familiar with, and that's the tier that makes transitional arrangements for a pupil who won't go back to their old school, but will be supported to transition to a different school when they're ready to, or indeed a suitable post-16 destination. So we absolutely, as an organisation, support these proposals in principle. We support a dedicated budget for it, but again, it's one of those areas where we're looking very closely to see what implementation clearly looks like. So that's what the Green Paper says about alternative provision. So I'm going to move on now to what it says about accountabilities and funding reforms. And Rani's touched on many of these points already. What I would say about this, and I think one of the big discussion points that our members are telling us about here, is that is the Green Paper trying to galvanise and improve the system through targets and accountability measures more than through adequate resourcing? I think that's a real discussion point that we need to come back to and keep talking about as we consider what the future system will look like. But you can see, again, there are a number of proposals there linked to clarity of responsibility and rendering account. What I would like to do is just pick out a couple of those, if you don't mind, because I think they're the ones that will resonate most with you in terms of your own context. The first of those is the national framework of banding and price tariffs for high needs funding, and it's really important in terms of how you engage with your local authority. So what the Green Paper is proposing is that there will be a new system of banding and price tariffs matched to a level of need and the types of education provision set out in the national standards that Rani referred to. So these bandings would cluster specific types of provision together, and the tariffs would set the rules and the prices paid for specific elements of the provision. So it's a more consistent and regulated system. And so the government are committed or have said that they would produce guidelines which would inform who pays for that support and how councils would set the funding levels that will be set actually by how councils would set the funding level, how councils set funding levels informed by government guidance. That aspect is open to consultation, and that's important because not every area, not every locality is the same in terms of its context. So that in terms of how you engage with local authority support, I think is a really important proposal to keep an eye on. The other one I wanted to single out was funding generally. So as you know, at the moment, local authorities set a notional special educational needs budget for their mainstream schools. We're on a journey, aren't we, towards a national funding formula. So it follows that the DfE have said that they're going to move to standardise those notional special educational needs budgets with central government actually setting the budget allocations themselves and building it in to the national funding formula. But what's important, I think, for us those of us who govern, is that the department have also said that if you're a mainstream school, you should continue to expect to meet some of the additional costs of supporting pupils with SEND. As you know, right now that's at the level of £6,000. That's the threshold. The government want to look at that. The Green Paper has pledged to consider whether that current amount or that current threshold is the right threshold. So again, if you have something to say about that in the in terms of the consultation, then I would encourage you to do that based on your lived experience. So if I may, we'll move on to delivering change for children and families. And this aspect of the Green Paper is really important because it's about stabilising local SEND systems. We've heard and we've mentioned just how variable the levels of support are, and just how much they are at the mercy of lack of resources. So these proposals, the label Delivering Change for Children and Families, are about stabilising the system and about delivery and implementation. So local authorities with the biggest deficits, and some have absolute huge deficits, will be supported by a safety valve programme, a safety valve funding programme, and an £85 million programme to transform the way that they deliver their SEND services to create a financially sustainable environment that meets the needs of pupils in their context. The Department for Education SEND and Alternative Provision Directorates will be working with system leaders and others to develop the standards that Rani's discussed. The 70 million to support the change programme, which I mentioned earlier, the new money, will be available to test and refine the proposals that we've given you an overview of, and there will be a national delivery plan as well as a national SEND board and of delivery partners to check implementation, and I guess create that accountability. And again, these are things that we broadly welcome, because we think local authorities, as we accept, don't always get this right, but they need support, not only in terms of financial support, but they need support to be able to hold their partners to account if they fail to meet their part of the bargain in terms of their contribution to meeting the child's special needs and educational needs, or creating the opportunities for them to be in an inclusive environment. The way that local authorities are held to account through a SEND inspection framework, we think that can be simplified. But at our level, at NGA's level, one of the biggest things we think we would say around inspection and SEND is that the inspection framework for schools really should work in such a way that it is not possible for any school to be judged outstanding unless they can demonstrate very clearly that they provide an inclusive environment. We think that is equally important. So these system changes, the way these proposals will be delivered, which is the essence of this slide, are crucial. The devil is in the detail here, or rather the implementation, and that is going to be one of the recurring themes of our consultation response. So I think I'm moving on at this point now to hand back to Rani to try and put this into more of a governing context, because I think that's really valuable.
Yep, so as Steve said at the beginning, we have the consultation and we have the proposals. But for now, the duties and responsibilities set out in the 2014 SEND Code remain in force. And so we wanted to really finish this webinar by talking about what governing boards can do right now to help manage SEND within their school or trust. So to manage SEND effectively, boards need some basic information. They should be aware of what SEND is and what it means when a child or young person has SEND. Now, there is a definition in the SEND Code, and that can be summarised to broadly mean in practice that a pupil has a learning difficulty or a disability that calls for special educational provision to be made. In terms of the types of SEND, governors and trustees are not expected to have a detailed knowledge of all the various needs that exist. However, for context, boards should be aware of the types of needs that exist within their own setting. Not every child and young person with SEND will have, or indeed require, an EHC plan. And so it's important that governors and trustees are aware and are asking questions about all pupils that require additional support. This will help ensure that those pupils are receiving the necessary support and that it is having the desired impact. To effectively monitor SEND provision, Governors and trustees need to understand the provision within their setting. Every school or trust will manage the needs of their pupils in a way that's appropriate for them. Boards really need to understand how this is done in practice. As you'll know, a core function of the governing board is to oversee the financial performance and make sure money is well spent. To do this well, governors and trustees need to understand how much money is coming in and what it is being used for and the impact it is having. A key element of being able to challenge effectively is knowing who is responsible for what within the school and ensuring that they have the necessary skills. And so staff should be undertaking relevant CPD to ensure that they are in a position to meet the needs of pupils and share good practice with other staff. Training should therefore be appropriate and delivered in a way that will maximise impact. In terms of progress and attainment, the governance competency framework expects those governing to be able to question leaders on how the in-school assessment system effectively supports the attainment and progress of all pupils, including those with SEND. This will require at least a basic understanding of how the attainment and progress of pupils with SEND is assessed within your school or trust. The board should therefore be receiving regular progress and attainment headlines, including information on the impact of interventions. The attainment data provided to the board should include a breakdown of progress and attainment data by complexity or type of SEND. And this will allow boards to compare different groups and see more easily how the school or trust's approach is working for them. Beyond attainment data, other data that the board can use to monitor and evaluate SEND management include exclusions data, with governors asking whether pupils with SEND are overrepresented when it comes to fixed term and permanent exclusions. Attendance data, are absent rates of pupils with SEND higher than those without? And data such as data on bullying incidents. Whether pupils are progressing through the school system or moving towards adulthood, governing boards should assure themselves that their pupils are fully prepared. Next slide, please. How SEND is viewed and managed within a school or trust will be largely determined by culture. The governing board will be key in setting this culture from the top, and their approach will filter through to the rest of the setting. The principle of Think SEND applies to all decisions, not just those with an obvious link to pupils with SEND. For example, changing the behaviour policy could have unintended consequences for pupils with SEND. And so for every decision made by the board, consideration should be given to how that decision will impact pupils with SEND. SEND funding, how it is spent and the impact it has should be a focus of the board, and this approach should be replicated by senior leaders within the school. Everyone working within the school needs to be committed to supporting pupils with SEND. One approach is for staff to view SEND as they would safeguarding. All those working in schools understand they have a role to play in relation to safeguarding, and even though they may not be a safeguarding lead, they would not seek to abdicate their safeguarding responsibilities. And a similar approach should be taken for SEND. The culture within a school should be that it's not only the SENCO or other members of the senior leadership team that have a responsibility towards pupils with SEND, but that every leader within the school that has a distinct responsibility or leads on an area should be expected to incorporate SEND into their decision making. For example, the head of English should be constantly thinking about how the curriculum meets the needs of all the pupils, including those with SEND. And this is something that governing boards can look out for when monitoring attainment and progress in different subjects. Governors and trustees need to be confident that not only are relevant meetings between staff and families taking place, but that pupils are being listened to. This should be evident in conversations with the SENCO and by engaging with parents and carers, maybe via surveys. Finally, the SENCO is key to ensuring that the needs of pupils with SEND are met. Governing boards should ensure that the SENCO is given adequate protected time to undertake their role, that they are not overloaded with admin, and if the SENCO is not a member of the SLT, that they are able to engage in leadership planning and decisions. There should also be additional support available and a succession plan in place, such as the appointment of a deputy or assistant SENCOs. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Rani. Just to say that we do think very much and very deeply about how at board level we can have the best influence we can on creating an inclusive culture, and indeed meet our statutory responsibilities and our best endeavours to support pupils with SEND. So we're constantly thinking about how we can update and improve our guiding content. Our current guide to the role of governance in meeting the needs of pupils with SEND is very popular, and we're very grateful for the feedback we've had on that. That sets out what the legal duties are, how the board can influence that inclusive culture that Rani has just been talking about, and also has some role descriptions for those of you who carry out a special responsibility role with oversight of SEND, and linking perhaps with your SEND co and board members to monitor how that works in practice. We have some information and indeed a checklist just so you can perhaps evaluate in a very quick and easy way how you feel you're meeting your SEND responsibility. So do visit our knowledge centre to look at that guidance and let us know what you think, most importantly, and how it can be improved. And actually, what I'd like to say, about our webinar before we close is that we know, and we are very acutely aware that mainstream and special schools work so incredibly hard to support the needs of all their pupils and create the inclusive culture, that we've been discussing, and that those of you who govern and volunteer and give up your time put a great deal of thought into ensuring that happens. So it really is about us all working together to create the type of system that these pupils need and deserve, and that families should expect to be able to access. So that comes with a change of mindset and culture to some degree, but also we need to address that issue around a persistent lack of funding and resources. So we need to get a lot right here, and we need to do it quickly as well, because this has gone on for too long, and that will be, that's the essence of our response, I think, to the consultation, and we're more than happy to hear from you on what you think we should place a particular emphasis on. So in closing, it's wonderful that you've been able to join us and give up your time. We're very grateful for that. You know that we're always here for you. We're constantly learning. We're constantly learning from you, and we never take for granted the privilege of supporting you, whether that's through information or guidance or professional development, or indeed the advice service that Rani leads so well. And we love hearing from you about what we can do to help you do a good job on behalf of our children and young people, because you are inspiring to us. So I think that's about the end of our webinar. I hope you found it useful. I hope that it has given you food for thought, and that we're going to see you at some point this summer at one of our events. Next week we are in our summer conference season. We have a rich and varied programme of seminars covering everything from pupil wellbeing to our role in achieving environmental sustainability. For any governance professionals tuning in, our summer term network meeting is coming up fast. That will be on the 30th of June. We also have a Young Governance Network meeting, and regional forums and MAC governance networks, and yet another webinar, one more webinar this term on Ofsted inspection and governance, all to fit in before schools break up. So we're not taking our foot off the pedal here. We're very much looking forward to engaging with you over the coming weeks. But I think for now, what I'd like to just say is thank you for joining us, but as I always say, a big thank you for everything that you do on behalf of children and young people, and we look forward to seeing you again and hearing from you very soon. So have a good evening. Thanks very much.